Well, I'm delighted to have with me today Henry Rose Lee, who's an old friend, but also an intergenerational expert. Now, that's quite an impressive title. But one of the things that is particularly interesting is you talk a lot and you consult a lot, helping organizations enable the productivity, the collaboration, the engagement of 5 different generations. Now, that's quite intriguing. I hadn't even thought there were 5 in any organization, but thinking about it, there probably are. I wonder if you could start by just telling us a bit about these 5 different generations and how are they different?
The 5 different generations are really just labels. So before I explain any of them, I just want to say one thing. When we're in an environment like this, where we're sharing information, we're learning from each other, we're looking at various insights, I label the hell out of things. But then after that, outside of this environment, we don't use the labels. So I just wanted to be clear about that. The intergenerational theory is a theory, and somebody gave it labels. And those 2 somebodies were William Strauss and Neil Howe back in the late 1980s. They first came up with the theory. So they're the ones that gave us the labels, which everybody disagrees with. So happy to talk about the labels, but then I'd prefer really to talk about younger talent or older talent.
Great.
Because then I'm not labeling people so much. So yes, there are around 5 different generations in the workforce today. So the oldest would be known as the silent generation, named by Strauss and Howe. And the silent generation run from 1925 to 1945. So they'd be about 76 to 96 in 2021. And stiff upper lip, great work ethic, probably leather shoes with laces. They probably believe in very well developed planning, organization, social and communication skills, very analog. Lots and lots of people, lots and lots of paper, lots and lots of individuals who might be working on a factory floor or a warehouse. The kind of working practices that we would have expected 100 years ago that lasted really until the 1960s. So that's the silent generation. There's probably under 2% of them in the UK workforce today, probably slightly more in the mainland Europe workforce today, but they're mostly in family businesses. In corporates, you know as well as I do, John, that they tend to get to around late 50s, early 60s, and suddenly they're not there anymore. So we don't really have silence unless they're a CEO, a very senior individual, or they own the bat and the ball and the game of the organisation. After that, you've got baby boomers. And baby boomers are very famous for a number of things, not least because they are the richest generation we've ever had. Now, it's a bell curve. So obviously you get some of them who are not rich, but statistically, globally, between 2004 and 2010, baby boomers who are aged today between 57 and 75, born 1946 to 1964, they were the richest generation in the world, and they held 80% of the world's personal wealth. So they got a bit beaten up by various recessions, COVID, and various other things will have had an impact, but they are still very rich. You would expect every generation that comes after the one before to be richer, but it stops with baby boomers. After that, people start to get poorer, in inverted commas, so there's less wealth. But anyway, baby boomers, so called because of the huge spurt in birth rate after the Second World War.
Right.
And Strauss and Howe came up with that name, baby boomers, but really it was really being bandied about because of this huge spurt in birth rate. Apparently, if you have war, when you come back home again, you make babies. That's obviously the rule. If you look at 2012 in the UK, we had the Olympics and the Paralympics, and in 2013, there was another big spurt in birth rate, but just in 2013, and then when it went back down to normal again. So that was really another thing that came to me, that apparently if you have war, you make babies, but if your team wins, you make babies. But it's okay, because you see in the UK we don't win that much, so our birth rate is roughly stable. So those are baby boomers. They look very much like silence in many ways, in that they had the great work ethic, very organised, prepared, planned. They also believed in influence and power of authority, but they were starting to use new technologies because the Second World War produced new textiles, new construction, new technology. And so they benefited from that. They also had free NHS and free tuition in the UK. And that started to make a big difference. That technological and infrastructure advance really gave baby boomers a lot of positives. And in fact, they managed to carry those through even till today. So they're sort of part of a bridge to the silent generation, the old analog generation, lots and lots of people, but they're starting to look at new technologies as well. But it's not until you get to Generation X, who were born between 1965 and 1981, that you start to see a real difference. And that's really because of technology. So you're seeing computers arrive, you're seeing email arrive, you're seeing lots of new ideas coming into workplaces. You're seeing fewer people being able to run offices and factories and warehouses. So that's sort of the start of a post-internet, computer-based workforce. And lots more innovation as well. But Generation X, bless them. I feel I ought to apologise to anybody who is aged today between 41 and 56, because you are Generation X, and you are named after a book written by Douglas Coupland called Generation X, which basically says you're a bit rubbish when you were young and you were feckless and lazy and didn't want to work and you were a snob. Is this ringing a bell? Because millennials and Generation Z get called these sorts of things as well. But actually, a book written in 1991 about Generation X said exactly the same things. Our youth of today have got no respect. They're not polite. They don't know how to work properly. So isn't it interesting for me that in generational theory, what you get is it seems like older generations disparage the younger ones. But before you get too worried about younger ones, younger generations disparage older ones as well. So they've all got their views. I remember one young individual coming up to me a couple of years ago and saying, I can tell by looking at you that you're not a millennial or a Generation Z, so you're not young talent. And I was a bit annoyed by it. I said, yes, you're absolutely right. And they said, so I've got this serious question to ask you about your generation and how you used to work. And I said, okay, go for it. And she said, how did you get any work done before email? And I said, I didn't, obviously. I didn't do any work. Because her view was, email changed everything. And in fact, come on, you can't possibly have worked at all unless you had email. That's a lovely sort of Generation X point, that email really came in, really hit pay dirt at that time. So poor Generation X, you are squeezed between older generations that are living longer and working longer, and you are squeezed between younger generations, and there's lots of them, they're in big numbers, and you're also the smallest generation statistically in the world. Do you know why that is, John? Why it's the smallest generation?
No.
Yeah, well, the reason is because of contraception, divorce, and also because more women were coming into the workforce. So probably less time to make babies, probably more opportunities to make a choice about your body. And so statistically, if you look at many of those graphical maps of populations, you know the ones I mean? They're sort of shaped like this with the bars. If you look at globally, most countries in the world, they have like an egg timer. So they go in at Generation X between 1965 and 1980 because there were fewer people born, and then they come out again. So they're shaped like that, like an hourglass or an egg timer. So that's Generation X.
Yeah.
And they really are a bridge between the old and the new. They have a lot of the social and communication and working practices and skills of the older generations because that's where they learnt them. But they also start to embrace new technologies such as computerization, digitization, email, and so on. And so they're definitely that bridge. And then we come to the fourth generation in the workplace, which is millennials. Now, they were named by Strauss and Howe as millennials, but actually most people called them Generation Y, because after Generation X, those alphabetical letters just got into place. So we have Y and Z and A. And in fact, the youngest generation alive today will be born between 2010 and 2025, and they're called Generation Alpha. So we've gone back to A. So the next one after that will be B, and so on. But Strauss and Howe were not happy with Generation Y. They didn't want to call them that, because they felt that there was some real difference between Generation X and Y. And so they started to call them millennials. Now, millennials are born between 1981 and 1997. Now, the challenge of that is you can see that none of them was born in the millennium. So why are they called millennials? Well, they're called millennials because Strauss and Howe reckoned that in the year 2000, the oldest of them would be coming into the workforce, starting to make money for society, starting to deliver value for society. And so that's why they're called millennials. And that's why we have a kind of confusion when you look online and you see that you've got millennials or you've got Gen Y, and actually they're the same thing.
Okay.
And then the youngest generation is Generation Z. And they run from 1997 to 2009. And as you can see, they're following the XYZ, and that name is stuck. And I like to call them millennials on steroids. So they're absolutely the new world of digitization. They have grown up with technology. They have never not known or understood computers. Therefore, they're tech savvy. And often Generation Z and the youngest generation, Alpha, are often called the glass generation because they look at so many glass fronted devices. It's like iPads and laptops and smartphones and things like that. So they are like millennials in that millennials and Generation Z share that sense of a new world that is completely technologically advanced, and the old world of paperful and lots of people has really gone. Structures have become very flat in the workplace. What we're finding is that younger generations get promoted more quickly. There are jobs now in place that weren't in place even a year ago or 5 years ago. New jobs are being invented all the time. For example, we have new COVID jobs that we didn't have a year ago. You have COVID compliance officers, and you have back to work officers and things like that. It's fascinating. But absolutely, these youngest generations are at the forefront of new technologies, new ways of working, and new ideas and new job roles that perhaps weren't here even just a few years ago. So Generation Z, what's different about them? Well, if you've grown up online, then the biggest thing is your social media feed. And in fact, for me, the biggest challenge in today's workforces today is that the workforce no longer has the sense of loyalty and commitment that it used to have when young individuals came into a workplace. So in the past, before technology, can't even say that, before computers, before all of these different types of apps and social media, what you would have is you would have your home and personal life, your friends, that would be one community, and then the other community would be your work-based community. You would tend to copy or follow, or at least like to some extent, the ideas that were already in the workforce, and you would follow those, and there would be a level of commitment and loyalty that was just naturally there the longer you stayed. That's gone. What we've got now is that the most important community for our youngest talent is in their social media feed. That's never happened before. And it's changed the way that people think, buy, sell, interact, communicate, and work. So our youngest generation are very interesting because that's how they have been looked at the world, how they've been looking at the world. And also, I guess another difference for them is that they're the most entrepreneurial generation we've ever had, Generation Z. And Generation Alpha, the one that's to come, will also be highly entrepreneurial because, of course, they too are growing up with social media. So you might say to me, well, okay, that's Generation Z. The oldest of them, 16 to 24, will be in the workforce. The youngest, 12 to 16, isn't there yet, but that's the latest generation in the workforce. And they're very entrepreneurial because of social media. They're all about to think of new ideas and, setting up a business online, and I'm going to have a side hustle or a slashy, or, there's all these words for the different types of jobs that they think they're going to have. But they have no training for it. We don't train entrepreneurialism in schools. We don't have apprentices with it. Unless you actually do some kind of business degree or some kind of HNC or HND or an NVQ that has a module in entrepreneurialism, you don't learn it. So you've got all these people going, I'm going to do this, it's going to be amazing, with no training whatsoever. And in fact, there's a funny statistic I got from Glasgow University that said when they ran entrepreneurial programs through their Hunter department, they discovered that the vast majority of people that learned about entrepreneurialism then didn't want to do it because it was too hard. It's too difficult. So those are your 5 generations.
Wow, that's an amazing, rich picture. I've had an education in the last 10 minutes. That's fantastic. As a baby boomer, I'm now slightly worried because I think, maybe I don't understand these young people. But no, that's really helpful. But in what you just said, that really touches on what I'd love to get into next. You and I met, first of all, at a course all about innovation, and I know you share my interest in it. What does all this mean for innovation? Not least, if I'm trying to make innovation happen in a reasonable size organisation, I'm likely to have all of these generations. Are they all going to participate the same, or can you just sort of unpack the implications of this for innovation?
I think the implications for innovation fall into 2 camps, and I would call those 2 camps good news and bad news.
Okay.
The
Bad news is that statistically, if you look at a lot of the organizations across the world, what you're finding is that it takes organizations as long to innovate as it always has, except for 2020 when COVID hit. And that was the first time that organizations had started to think about the fact that they couldn't move fast enough and they needed to move more quickly. So it took a crisis and an emergency to bring us good news, which says that we can innovate more quickly. But the bad news is we often don't. Now, more bad news is that what happens is that the people at the top of the organization, until very recently, tended to be older generations. Nothing wrong with that. Older generations have experience, skills, knowledge. They have a level of wisdom because their emotional intelligence is increasing. The older we get, the more emotional intelligence we have, and that's very powerful and important, not just for running a successful business, but also for managing all kinds of relationships and for bringing in innovation. You need good emotional intelligence to be successful at that. But the bad news is that not only was it taking a long time, but there tended to be more senior people who, in fact, instead of getting closer to innovation, had moved further away from it. Because when we're young, we're just naturally interested in innovation, novelty, variety, and change because it's all new. If you've ever had children or grandchildren, you'll think about the first time they had chocolate or the first time they went on the bike with boosters or without boosters. It's really exciting because everything's new. But by the time we're in our 40s, we're starting to think, yeah, done that. That was a cock up. That didn't work. Don't like that anymore. So we can get very far removed from innovation, not least because we now look at it in terms of what we do when we're older, which is structure, stability, and strategy. Those are things which make organizations very successful. But by definition, that bad news can be that it puts so much structure, stability, and strategy around it that it can kill off the very kind of crazy, weird, different, new innovation that's sometimes required. So that's the bad news. The good news is that we have so many new technologies, and we've had COVID absolutely attack our foundations as a global family, that I believe that it's quite possible that innovation will get a big boost and that we will have fewer organizations going, we really can't try that, because they will have seen in front of them, they will have seen before them or inside their own organizations how quickly things have been able to move. And I think they can embrace agility, which bluntly was really only ever used by technology companies for software or hardware development and never really got translated into other parts of the organization. But my hope is that the good news is there are loads of technologies about. COVID's really kicked us in the bum. It's really woken us up and said, we can do things more quickly. So I think, good news, bad news, however you look at it, I think it's possible for us to be more agile and to create the opportunity, the space for better and quicker innovation to come into place.
That's fascinating. And I guess your characterization of these different generations, these different sort of levels or different players in our organizations, reminds me of one of those themes that comes through in everything I've ever read about innovation, the importance of diversity. So different viewpoints, different skill sets, different techniques. People come at innovation from different angles, and that's the wonderfully rich thing. If we all thought the same, it would be rather non-innovative. That's great. So we know diversity matters. How do we make that actually work for us in organizations? So imagine that I'm in a company, perhaps I'm a baby boomer, I'm therefore a fairly senior player by now. How am I going to get the best out of my workforce in terms of innovation by mobilizing this diversity? Any thoughts in that direction?
I have a number of thoughts in the direction of mobilizing diversity and using that to really boost innovation, because I agree with you, diversity really helps the richness of innovation. And in fact, there's lots and lots of research from everybody from McKinsey, Deloitte, PwC, you name it. They say that diversity makes companies more money. It doesn't just make people engaged and happier, it makes them more money. So it's, it's got a business case all of its own. So I think in terms of mobilizing that diversity, it's got to start at the top. So it doesn't matter what generation you are. Remember I said if we take all the labels away, then we're just looking at older or younger generations, older or younger people. That's just another form of diversity like ethnicity or gender or beliefs or orientation. So it starts at the top. I think leaders have to take a long, hard, and sometimes very difficult look at themselves and go, is it me? Am I the problem? Because if they are, then it starts with them role modeling different behaviors. And that's harder than it sounds. If we've got into structure, stability, and strategy and moved further away from innovation, starting at the top can be difficult. But here's a number of things that I've seen clients do. Not least, they can create a sort of company within a company, which is based only on innovation. So Lloyd's has done it, Santander has done it, Vodafone has done it, Virgin has done it. I've got other clients that have done it where they've said, look, we are what we are, we're doing what we do. But if we want to have more innovation, as a leadership at the top, we can create the environment for a team or teams to come in and look at innovation. So, for example, Santander had a sort of blue sky organization, and a lot of the new things that they've been doing inside their company have been because of this blue sky organization that said, I know it's not broke, but why don't we fix it differently? So I think it really starts at the top. I think it's got to be inclusive. And I want to say something about inclusivity, which is that there is an inclusivity strategy director, and she works for Netflix. I can't quite remember her name, but I remember her quote. She said, diversity is inviting everyone to the party, but inclusion is getting everyone to dance. And I think it really means that what the leaders do, and that's why it has to start from the top, look at every part of the organization and see how they can connect people together. And I want to tell you about a little organization I work with called Pure Planet, based in Bath. They're Bath in the UK. They're the first online broker for energy, and it's sustainable energy. And as you would expect in this organization, the people at the top are baby boomers. You have a couple of Generation X managers, and then everybody else is sort of young talent, average age between 24 and 28. So on the cusp of Generation Z into millennials. So quite young staff and older leadership. And what they've done is they've created the opportunity for this inclusivity, for this diversity, which is bringing them innovation. And here's what they do. The first thing they've done is they've created different levels in their workforce, even though they don't actually exist. So let's say I'm in a team of 8 people and you're my boss, you're my team leader. What Pure Planet do is they create roles which encourage people to see the world in a different way. So say there's 8 people in this team. They say, right, it's not mandatory, but we're going to offer you the opportunity. You, Joe Bloggs, can become a coach to the team if you like. And you, Janie Bloggs, you can become a supervisor to the team. And Pure Planet call that supervisor the governor. And the governor gets an opportunity to look at the team in a different way and support them. And the coach, as the name implies, coaches them. And then after 3 months, they come back down into the team of 8 people, and then 2 other roles come up. So that rotation of roles that didn't really exist beforehand has come in. And they've brought in other roles as well, like product champions, service champions, and you can try your hand at that role, try your hand at another role, and then you come back down into the fold, into the team. And the thing I love about rotating roles and creating them is that that gives you the energy. It gives people a different lens, and it's in those kind of happenstance opportunities that a lot of innovation happens. The other thing they've done is they've created a community with their customers. And that community is not just the customers, but it's also the people who work in the teams. And so regularly they're talking to customers, really talking to customers. It's all online, but it's really happening on a regular basis. And I think that too creates the environment for more of those happenstance discussions where ideas come out. And then of course they have a forum a bit like Virgin or Vodafone or Lloyd's or Santander, which is a sort of blue sky organization within which is looking at these ideas as they come along the conveyor belt. So I think that's very powerful. And I think one other thing I'd like to say is that when you have an opportunity to create innovation, it needs structure. So you remember I said older generations do structure, stability, and strategy. Innovation really needs that. Otherwise, what you get is a funny story I'm going to share with you. I used to do a lot of work for Eurotunnel. And one of the things that we talked about was innovations in the way, not just that the service ran along the Channel Tunnel between Calais and Folkestone, but also about different ways of running the service, looking after people in terms of safety, all sorts of things. And we would regularly do surveys to get innovation ideas. And one of them was where somebody said, we want pink toilet paper. And it was then that I realized that you can't just have innovation for innovation's sake,
Because, of course, the leadership looked at that and said, well, we don't want pink toilet paper. And I said, hang on a minute, we need to say thank you to the individual that came up with the idea that all the trains need pink toilet paper. But we also need to tell them why they can't have it. And of course, if you think about it, pink toilet paper is more expensive than white toilet paper. And so it was easy for us to say to them, brilliant idea, really cool, really funky idea, but actually we can't do it because it's going to cost us a lot more money to have pink toilet paper in the toilets rather than white. And I know that's a silly story, but there is a very serious view behind that. And that's that leaders need to create not just the environment to encourage innovation, but then the framework to protect it and make it real and make it happen. Otherwise, what you've got is loads of people going, I've got this amazing idea. And the organization doesn't know it, can't eat it, can't use it, can't afford it. And then all of that fantastic innovation dies away. So with my clients, what I've tried to do is to create innovation frameworks, which are unique to each organization, but which create that sort of structure, stability and strategy and a business case for any idea. And if it ticks the boxes of the business case, it will be piloted. If it doesn't, then it's a thanks very much, what can we learn from this, and a move on. So I know that was a long answer, but that's basically how I see certain ways to really boost innovation.
Henry, that's absolutely fascinating, and I have to say encouraging. What I'm hearing is it's not a case of one size fits all. It is recognizing the enormous diversity and trying to match that with diverse approaches to dealing with it. But I'm also reminded of I think he'd have to belong to the silence by now if he was still alive, but Peter Drucker, who was one of the great sort of writers on innovation, and he's had a very famous article about the discipline of innovation. And for me, that's a kind of oxymoron. Hang on, innovation is all about being creative. Yes, but it also needs that kind of discipline and structure, which is exactly what you've talked about. That's been really fascinating and really helpful. I guess we are in the future going to require even more creativity, even more entrepreneurial behavior. And for me, entrepreneurs are the ones who do innovation. And what's gratifying in your picture that you paint of Generation Z and Generation Alpha now, they're entrepreneurial. So that's the kind of good news. But as a teacher of innovation, maybe I'm also challenged by what you said a little earlier, the need to provide the skills and the abilities to go on top of or to align with that entrepreneurial spirit. I wonder if you could just, in conclusion, comment a little on how we might build this kind of entrepreneurial capability into our organizations, not just amongst the Gen Zs, amongst the whole organization, but any thoughts in that direction?
Yes, I do think that entrepreneurialism is a very powerful boost for innovation. And in fact, it's necessary. And I do believe that there is a lack of skills. So it's not going to happen in schools. Some bright spark said to me last week, why don't we just put entrepreneurialism on the, on the syllabus for schools? And I was like, yeah, like they need any more work to do. However, I think that in the same way that media and IT skills have absolutely appeared in the curriculum of further education, I think we could have more courses there because it is a foundation for the future. And in fact, the World Economic Forum in January came out with a report that said that we need more of these types of entrepreneurial skills. So higher literacy and numeracy, obviously, but also higher cognitive behaviors, which is where entrepreneurialism starts to sit. So I think organizations could really benefit from starting to bring in their own learning and development, which isn't just, what good looks like in our organization and how you use this widget to do X or how you use this software to do Y, but also entrepreneurialism as a foundation skill. Could be with apprentices, it could be with graduate programs. I would love to see that, especially some of the big boys and girls could do with having these entrepreneurial skills at foundation level when they come in as new graduates. I think that's highly possible. And then smaller organizations, I think what they could do is in the same way that they often send their people to go and get trained on selling skills or marketing skills, there are entrepreneurial skills training out there. As I say, Glasgow University has a big system, a program in their Hunter function. And I really think that it's possible to do that. So I think there's a level which could come into further education. And I also think that organizations who want to be enlightened and really go after innovation, they are kind of duty bound to look for those skills and try and coach and train them into their workforce. And in fact, older generations are just as interested in innovation as younger generations, as long as it makes sense to them. So I think that they wouldn't be averse to those skills either. And in any case, I would want every organization to offer these skills to anybody, no matter what their age, and not just look at them and say, because you're older, you're not going to understand innovation. The likelihood is that they could be just as entrepreneurial and just bring a different lens to it. So really, that's what I'd like to see happen.
Yeah, I think that makes a great deal of sense, especially as we are moving to a world where we've got to be smarter, not just harder working, but be smarter. And in a sense, that smartness is, and COVID's shown us, very much going to depend on our innovative abilities. So I think you've given us some wonderful insights. Thank you so much for spending the time, Henry.
It's a pleasure. Thank you very much for allowing me to spout off for so long about something about which I'm incredibly passionate. So thank you.
Thanks a lot.